He's the voice of a generation of conservatives, and now that voice is threatened. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, today, Rush Limbaugh told his listening audience, millions of people across the country, that he has recently been diagnosed, and it's been confirmed by two major medical institutions, with advanced lung cancer. Elsewhere on the radio, I heard they described it as stage 4 cancer. He intends to continue to do his show as often as he is able to do so while not in treatment. And he doesn't really yet have that all worked out, what that's going to be like, but he's going to be taking a couple of days off. We're recording this on February 3rd, and he expects to be back in the studio on Thursday this week. Bill, I'm kind of torn on how to approach this because it's a diagnosis. It's not a sentence. But I do think that it behooves us to take some time to reflect on the impact of this 31-year national radio career for Rush Limbaugh. What first comes to mind as you hear this news and think about the impact of it?
He sits on Olympus by himself. There's no one close to him. Not just in terms of longevity, obviously, but of impact. I mean, he's the father of all of us, really. Rush Limbaugh alone essentially invented talk radios as we understand it today, and he alone carried the torch for conservatism for at least the first half of those 30 years. He, to this day, is still, of all the people I've known out there, is still the one who is most likely to elicit a gasp from me in terms of just his moral courage and his clarity. I had no idea about this. I'm deeply, deeply saddened by it. Having him autograph a book to me once and just having him know who I was one of the high points of my life, let alone the very kind words he wrote. And he's a legend. And when you told me this, my first thought was, now we're going to see not the qualitative difference, but the quantitative difference between left and right. You and I and Steve have talked many times about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who seems to be really quite dreadfully ill, and we say we disagree wholeheartedly with her politics and think she's done a lot of damage, but we wish her a healthy recovery and so on. And I suspect that the left is going to greet this news and any subsequent news in a particularly nasty fashion.
He really is the founder of an entire genre of, he would call it entertainment. While he is doing commentary and there's a news element to that, I think above all other radio hosts in the conservative side or elsewhere, I think he never lost touch with the fact that what he is doing must primarily be entertaining. People must want to hear it. And he's never seen himself simply as somebody who is laying out the conservative position, but rather somebody who's making an entertaining radio show.
Yes, exactly right. And the other thing that I've always admired about Rush Limbaugh and always a sense that I've always gotten from him without exception was that while he certainly is probably unequaled in terms of going after the opposition, I've never, ever heard him use any form of condescension towards the American people in any way. I've never heard him speak down to them. I've never heard him act like he was a star. He was better than them. I've never gotten any of the sense of elitism and entitlement that you often get from movie stars and some left-wing commentators and, Chris Matthews and Keith Olbermann's and all the rest. You just get the impression that these guys just get in and out of their limousines, don't want to talk to anybody. Rush's great appeal was that much like the people that wrote the Constitution, he spoke to, I hate to even talk about it in the past tense. He speaks to the American people plainly and without trying to impress them with these big words that are not necessary. And at the same time, he doesn't condescend to people. He doesn't talk down to them. He doesn't treat them like they're idiots. He treats them like they're equals, like they're fellow citizens. And Rush's great, great, great strength is the moral courage to come out and say as plainly as it can be said things that everybody knows is true. The entire philosophy of the left and progressivism has been to use the American people's fundamental decency against them by making them feel guilty for disagreeing with them. And anybody who disagrees with the leftists is a racist and homophobe and a white nationalist and a misogynist and all the rest. And Rush has had the consistent moral courage to not only withstand that, but to actually go right smack in the face of it. Some of the things he's done are just from a sheer argument point of view, from a sheer persuasiveness point of view, utterly brilliant and unequaled. And again, he's the only person that I can think of that consistently makes me go, I can't believe he just said that. And then immediately in the next split second realize, well, this is what you believe. This is what everybody else believes. He's just got the courage to come out and say it. Can I give you like my favorite example of this kind of thing? I remember, I don't listen to a lot of talk radio from anybody, but I remember somebody pointed this to me once. So I didn't hear it firsthand. But, all the talk about environmentalism and the demonization of wealth by people who have private jets and, DiCaprio and all the rest of this stuff. And on one incident, Rush Limbaugh said he was flying in his private jet to a golf tournament. And I thought, oh boy, he's really just kind of poking people where they live, because he doesn't seem to be ashamed of his private jet. And he seems to be proud of the fact that he worked very hard on the Excellence in Broadcasting Network in order to afford a private jet. So I thought, okay, good for you, Rush. And then he said, and as I was on my way to Texas from my home in Florida, I was halfway across the country, and I suddenly realized that I'd forgotten my favorite driver. It wasn't in my golf clubs with me, so I had EIB2, my other private jet, bring that club directly to the golf tournament. And I thought, my first thought was, honestly, because this is the genius of Rush Limbaugh is he would constantly show us how brainwashed we are, and how even the things that we deeply believe, we really don't even, not only do we not feel like we're allowed to say, sometimes we're not even allowed to think. And my first thought was, gee, that's really bad for the environment and all that money and just like instantly I thought, of course he did. He's worked his tail off. He's generated millions and millions and millions of dollars in revenue, given people emotional comfort, given them intellectual support. He's provided an unbelievable service on behalf of the spirit of the United States of America, on behalf of this country and everything it stands for. And when he said that first reaction was, what? And then instantly followed by, it's his jet. It's his money. He earned it. He's paying for it. He can do whatever he damn well wants with it. That's why he's Rush Limbaugh. That's why he's got the golden microphone. He worked his tail off in the wilderness by himself, and he's not going to allow the slackers and the losers that are trying to demonize hard work and the results of that, the success that comes from it. He's not going to allow them to run his life. He's going to go right into their face with it. I used my second private jet to go get my favorite golf club and bring it to me because I can, because I can. I didn't take people's money from them through taxation. I didn't coerce it out of them. I didn't steal it. I didn't get it through corruption. I got it by providing a service that people found worthy enough to pay for. And that's what I'm going to do with my money, the result of my work and my life. And when I heard that story, I was so filled with wonder. Just since we're in something, nobody's really in the same line of work that Rush Limbaugh's in, but still, I was just absolutely blown away by the power and the genius of how provoking that statement was. And especially I was mostly amazed at how I myself had been completely brainwashed by this pop culture that I was like, he said, what? It took me literally a second or two for me to come to my senses, and realize, yes, here's a guy who actually believes what he says he believes in, and he's not afraid of it. He's not ashamed of it.
Because Rush Limbaugh has been doing this show for some 31 years, his career actually started at a time when I was still on the political left. And so he is one of the two major influences that I credit for my movement toward a conservative constitutionalist view of governance. The other being my relationship with Christ, frankly, that just really changed everything about the way I see the world. Not to say that, don't want to mix Jesus and politics, but that reconfiguration of my worldview and how I viewed humanity really affected me. But I remember listening to Rush Limbaugh when I was still on the left, and I liked him, and he was funny, and he was engaging. He said things with which I disagreed, but I couldn't stop listening to him. And I think that he has accomplished something, Bill, that very few people in broadcast have figured out how to do, because he understands that in the privacy of a person's automobile, or in the privacy of that intimate relationship you have in their ear while listening to the radio, you can say and do things that if you did them face to face would be patently offensive, right, and off-putting. But he found a way to connect on a personal level that frankly led me to the point where the guy actually wrote a blurb for the first book that I wrote. And that's the other thing I wanted to say, Bill, is that contact with him, I reached out to him because he had read a number of my satirical news stories on his radio show. And so I reached out to him when I was going to publish a book and said, I'm about to do a book. Would you be interested in doing a blurb? He almost immediately wrote back and said, yes, he'd do it. But then he got caught up in other things and delayed. And it was a couple of weeks and I didn't hear from him. So finally, I had to go to press, and I just sent him a note right as he was going on the air on his show. I emailed him. He emailed me right back, like right before his show started, and said, hey, I'm sorry, Scott, I forgot about that. I'll get it to you right after the show. Within an hour after his 3-hour broadcast, he wrote this blurb that appears on the cover of my first book. And I just thought, he didn't have to do that. He got nothing out of it. I'm a little tiny flea in this world and will not gain him anything for having done it. But because he respected my work, he treated me like a human being, and nobody was the wiser that he's this kind of nice guy. Because on the radio, he's kind of a character.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, and apparently he got to be good friends with Seth MacFarlane, who, of course, is a giant, enormous left-winger behind Family Guy and so on. And you're right. It's like he's actually he's a nice guy. All the people I know that in conservative commentary are nice guys. And to the degree that we start running around with our hair on fire and screaming and yelling all these rants, it's because the things that we love that are not just good for us, that are good for everybody, are being intentionally, systematically destroyed by people who know better, leading people who don't know better down a very dangerous path. And the thing about Rush Limbaugh that is an example of what you talked about, and all of the dealings that I've ever heard anybody dealing with him had to say about him. There's a fundamental humility to that if you think about it. If you really think about it, you've got this guy who is alone at the top of the pyramid. There's no rivals for Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh does not have any competition. For him to do something like that for you is a sign of his humility, because many, many people in that kind of a position who are so far above the rest of the herd, they just simply, please don't bother me with the bleatings of the shepherds down there on the base of Mount Olympus while I crown myself in glory. He's not like that at all. He's a genuinely nice guy, and that's why people genuinely like him. And I should mention, certainly not letting a cat out of the bag or anything, but on the few occasions when people sometimes find him a little standoffish, most of that has to do with the fact that he's pretty nearly completely deaf. One of the reasons that you don't see him engaged in so many interviews or just open conversations is because he's got extremely severe hearing loss. And
his callers to the radio show are being transcribed in real time for him so that he can see that on a screen as the caller's coming in.
Yes. And so that is one of the reasons that you don't see him perhaps rubbing shoulders as much or doing like these in-depth interviews and so on. I got a chance to be in the same room with him in person and was utterly blown away by the guy. And I was reminded of this. And this isn't kind of, I'm sorry, can you say again kind of thing? Because I've got fairly bad hearing loss myself, but I'm only saying that so that I can get myself a little closer to the glory of Rush Limbaugh. That is the fundamental quality about Rush Limbaugh that I admire the most is his moral courage and his love of common people and his understanding that common people are not only not as good as the elites, they're better people, they're smarter people, kinder people. They're certainly more deserving of respect than they get. There's no one who speaks for them. And Rush Limbaugh turned millions of people into conservatives because, number one, as you say, he's funny, and that's not easy. And he's entertaining, and that's not easy either. But mostly, because unlike so many of the people who are on the left, which are always dealing with theory. I mean, it's this intellectualism and this theoretical nature of communism and existentialism, and it's all theory. Trotskyism, I'm a Bukharinite. Oh, really? I'm a Zenobiite. He just looks at the world, sees things that other people see, and says them. And the great, enormous gift that Rush Limbaugh has given to this country, and I believe he saved this country. I, honest to God, do not believe that this country would still be in this fight if it weren't for him personally. But the thing that he gives you is he gives you the sense that you're not alone, because it's a policy of the progressives to make the reasons that the progressives cannot allow debate or contrary viewpoints is why YouTube has to suppress conservatives. That's why you'll never hear their opinions on news, on CNN. The reason that conservative voices have to be suppressed all the time is because the left's only way to get what they want is to convince people who have different opinions that they're either all alone or dinosaurs, last of a dying breed, the future, they're on the wrong side of history, all of these things. And Rush Limbaugh is the kind of person who comes out and says, not only is what they're saying wrong, it's evil because they know it's wrong. And you know it's wrong. And I know it's wrong. And all of a sudden you're driving home from work and you don't feel like you're the last person in America. Take the flag with you when you leave, And the benefit, the actual social benefit that Rush Limbaugh has achieved is incalculable. He is one of the great patriots in the history of this country. And I put him in the same category as many of the founding fathers and many of our finest presidents. He has done more good for the idea of America as we understand the term than that. He's in a top 5 handful of Americans, in my point of view. And I think I could make that case pretty strongly from a sheer factual historical perspective.
Well, let's just finish up with what Rush Limbaugh says he told, and I'm reading from the transcript of today's radio show as we record this on February 3rd, 2020. He said, "I told the staff today that I have a deeply personal relationship with God that I do not proselytize about, but I do. And I've been working that relationship," and then he chuckles, "I've been working that relationship tremendously, which I do regularly anyway. But I've been focused on it intensely for the past couple of weeks. I know that there are many people listening to the sound of our voices right now who will want to work on behalf of Rush Limbaugh, that personal relationship with God intensely on his behalf. And I personally join you in prayer that this great American would find comfort and healing and joy in the process." He says he's going to keep doing things as much as he can, as he's always done it, and keep plowing ahead. And he also mentions, by the way, that he realizes a lot of his listeners have gone through and are going through the same thing. And so there's that kind of heart of compassion that naturally comes out of this conservative lion. Ladies and gentlemen, go ahead, Bill.
One thing. One of the most moving moments in all of movies, one that just went right to my heart, is at the very end of a movie called Meet Joe Black with young Brad Pitt as Death. It was originally Death Takes a Holiday. And Anthony Hopkins plays this good man who Death chooses to be his guide around the earth and gives him an extra few months of life before he takes him away. And at the end of the movie, they're walking away, Death and this guy Bill, played by Anthony Hopkins, and it's clear to everybody that they're going off into the afterlife. And just before they walk away, Hopkins turns to Death and says, "Should I be afraid?" And Death says, "Not a man like you." And I thought, yeah, that's it. Not a man like you. God's a listener. And I know that sounds flip, but it's not. All of the values that we have to deal with on earth to protect goodness and virtue on earth are manifested in that man. And I don't know to what degree he's worried. I suspect not very much, but from whatever small shred of perspective I have, there are some people who really should fear the afterlife, Rush, but not a man like you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're grateful to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this show possible, for our friends over at the Patriot Post, America's News Digest, who are the creators of some of the best memes on the internet, really humor in the mold and the model of that Rush Limbaugh created on radio, as well as the folks over at Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/Bill Whittle, you can support Bill. Now, the best way to do that, by the way, if you're wondering what's the best way to support us, that is through membership at BillWhittle.com. But there are some folks who either want to give more or can't give as much as it takes to become a member, and so they still want to participate. So you can do that at patreon.com/Bill Whittle. We are going on a cruise in May, and we'd like you to join us. We know that you're going to meet a lot of friends there. You can find out more about that by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking the big boat. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.